Okay,
There's Marion and Hester from Transport Canada.
great.
Everyone is seeing the landing page?
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get started. We want to keep everybody on schedule. I know everyone has a busy calendar, so we'll wait maybe 2 more minutes and then we'll get started. Thank you. Rebecca, do you think it's okay if we get started?
Yeah, I'll just continue to let people in as they come in. We can get started.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. It's really great to have you here. And we promise that we have a great speaker, and I think you're all going to find Shauna McMillan to be someone that you've invested your time well to come and listen to today. So let's get started, and we'll just have a look at what's our plan on the agenda. And first, we'll just talk about our purpose and our theme and what our mission is for the group. And then, as I mentioned, we are really blessed today to have Shauna McMillan speak to us about her experiences in the transportation and logistics industry. And then we'll look at our upcoming calendar and some of the dates that we'd like you to put into your calendars. And then Rebecca will talk about joining us in our journey with WiLAT, or the Women in Logistics and Transportation. And then we'll close off on time today and promise to get you back to your other lives that we're all living these days. So first of all, so who we are. We are part of CILTNA, which is the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport for North America. And of that is this group of WiLAT. I mean, everybody's pronouncing that differently, but we are female members sharing and networking. And our mission is to promote the status of women in logistics and transport. But most importantly, it's to bring together those who aid the career development of women and to provide a support network for women in the sector. And for those of us that have been in the sector for a long time, that is definitely something that's been missing. So our work towards this goal is concentrated in 4 areas: leadership, mentorship, entrepreneurship, and most importantly, empowerment. Within these areas, we work to bring change to our industry and the wider economy. We're also aware of our role in society and the responsibilities, not just to us, but to the women that come up behind us and to the planet, and for sure, all future generations. So we're hoping that you will help us in that goal. But our theme, which our group has come up with, and these are the executive as we are today. Jennifer can't join us. She's in the US. And then we've got Christine Boer, who many of you know, who's just a powerhouse of a lady and somebody that really I look up to with great admiration. Barb Breyer is also in our group. Julia Tassetti, and Rebecca, who is our anchor and managing just to be everywhere all at the same time, which we would not be able to do any of this without her help. So, you know, we're going to pause here and let Shauna talk, but just before we have Shauna come in, and Shauna, do you have slides?
No slides, just
Okay.
talking today.
All right, that's wonderful. That's great then. But just before we pass it over to Shauna, a couple of things. One, I just want to mention what our theme is for our group that we came up with on our own. It's not part of the WiLAT, if you will. It's our own here in North America. Behind every successful woman is a tribe of other successful women who have her back. And that we really believe in, and we take it to heart. So let me talk about, lastly, just before we go, my introduction to Shauna. And first of all, Shauna, on behalf of all of us in WiLAT, our condolences on your recent personal loss. Thank you for making time for us in what must be definitely a difficult time for you. So thank you. And I know that you've been juggling up more things even than usual. So we thank you very much for that. So I'm going to just introduce Shauna. I'm not going to read you her bio because you were all given that earlier on when we did the newsletter. So I just want to give some highlights of her career, and then I have a couple of comments of my own I'd just like to add at the end. So Ms. McMillan is a professional engineer, certified supply chain professional, certified production and inventory management from the Association of the Supply Chain Management Program. Most recently, she worked for the Canadian National Railway for over 8 years, holding the position of Assistant Vice President, Sales and Industrial Products, for metal, mineral, and frac sand products, which is how I know Ms. McMillan, to North American customers. She was the Chief of Staff to the President and CEO, and also the Director of Marketing. Shauna was also active in the community, elected to director role in the Brampton Board of Trade, where she served until late of 2021. Before joining CN, she worked for Canadian Tire for 14 years as their distribution and capacity planning for international transportation management. She holds a professional engineering, a Master of Science, and a transport management and supply chain degrees. Just a couple, which always is the thing, you know, the busy people are busier and busier and busier and busier. And this is absolutely the truth when it comes to Shauna. But as I was preparing for today, I realized that I only knew Shauna as an adversary. She was working for CN and I was representing the Chemistry Supply Chain Industry Association. And I never had the opportunity to tell her how good she was at her job because she was my adversary and we had to, beat each other up all the time. So, but when you think about it, we were both women doing the best job that we could and likely working twice as hard as most of the others. So, Shauna, please allow me to tell you, you were amazing in your role at CN, and they were so blessed to have you. Everyone, won't you please help me welcome Shauna McMillan, a friend of mine in womanhood.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that introduction. That is amazing. And you're right. As women in this industry, we tend to overwork ourselves. And it's a good thing that personally I hate to be bored because this industry is certainly never boring. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I know our time is of the essence and we have many, many demands on our time. But I think it's really important that as a group of women that we support each other in this very difficult industry that we've chosen for ourselves, but very rewarding industry as well. I've been in this industry, as Kathy mentioned, for a few years now. I won't count them all, but it's been a few years, and I've been both a customer of supply chain and logistics services as well as a provider of those supply chain and logistics services. And it gives me a unique perspective, having been on both sides of that negotiating table. And then on top of that, having worked for two massive organizations based in Canada, primarily, the amount of federal regulation and policy that impacts their ability to do their job and to do their work has added that additional layer of public affairs and government affairs. So what I will say is, I prefer a little bit of more of an informal chat, which is why I don't have slides going behind me and lots of bullet points and all kinds of things like that. I am an engineer, though. I love them. Don't get me wrong, a good chart and a graph, and I'm a happy girl. But today I wanted to have a little bit more of an informal chat, open it up so that as I'm going, if I use a term that you don't understand, please stop me and ask. If I'm talking about something you're not quite familiar with and I've moved too fast, please stop me. If there's a question just of how I landed where I did, by all means ask. This is a safe space for all of us, and I want to make sure that you get out of this as much as I know I'm going to by sharing it. I know the topic that we put out was, lessons learned and the opportunities that came out of the National Supply Chain Task Force. And I think I wouldn't do it justice if I didn't let you know what that task force looked like, how we got to where we did and where we are now. So coming out of the pandemic, and I know we all remember it as much as we want to block it out, it was 2 years of a lot of effort trying to get things to move when the world wasn't normal. And what it did was it exposed some of our weaknesses. And the longer the pandemic happened, the more of our weaknesses were exposed. Now, like I said, I'm an engineer by trade, an industrial engineer. So what we do is we look for bottlenecks and we look for process problems where things aren't moving the way they're supposed to be moving. And I can honestly say during the pandemic, pretty much nothing was working the way it was supposed to work. Demand wasn't happening the way it normally did. Consumer consumption wasn't happening the way it normally did. And everybody had to start scrambling. And the problem then perpetuated because we were recovering and we were getting to what we thought was a new normal, but then tripped over our own feet again. So the Minister of Transport at the time, Minister Alghabra, recognized that outside of the pandemic and outside of all of the things we had done, that exposure to some of our weaknesses needed to be looked at. So he formed a task force. It was 8 people, 2 co-leads and 6 members. And those members came from all walks of life. came in with, of course, a retail and a railroad background from Canadian National, CN, and from Canadian Tire. But we also needed to make sure that we covered regionally the entire country. So we had members coming from the East, members coming from the West, as well as from different industries. So I came in from a service provider and a retail perspective, but we also had experts in the grain industry and in the agricultural industry. We had experts that came in on the trucking side of the business. Because transport isn't just by rail. As much as the rails are huge, they don't do everything as much as everybody would like to think they do. So, you know, we needed other modes of transport involved. So it was really a good cross section of folks. And the reason I say that is we all come from different perspectives on how well supply chain logistics and transportation works. We all have a different point of view of what we felt and what we've experienced. So that task force, it was really important to have that diversity on the task force coming from different regions, different industries, different perspectives. So that when we came into a room together, we could bring all of that with us. What we also did was listen. And we interviewed and had meetings with well over 300 different stakeholders. Some of those were associations, some of those were individuals, some of those were companies. And when we listened, again, it was that individual or association's perspective on what was happening, their impression of what was happening. So it was really important to take a step back when we started assimilating some of those impressions and opinions and perspectives to say, there's always their story, our story, and the truth is somewhere in the middle. And the truth needs some facts and needs some data. So that all was encompassed in in the work that the task force did, and then resulted in the publication that came out almost a year and a half ago now. It was the fall of 22. And I know there's some folks from the Ministry of Transport on this meeting today, although I can't necessarily see all their faces right now presenting, but I know they're going to jump in and correct me if I get it wrong. So, but yes, I believe it was October 2022 when we finally published our results. And if you take a look at the results, there's themes in there. And these themes are applicable not only to the government and not only to the Ministry of Transport, but these themes are true of all of us and all of the companies we work for and all of the considerations we make. The first one basic lesson was our supply chain, logistics, transportation is a system. It's connected. So if you make a decision about one part of that system, it will impact another part of the system. So as an example, we import a lot of consumer products from overseas, from Asia. Those have to come in through a port of some kind to enter Canada. Those ports are connected to both truck mode and rail mode to get that product inland to the consumers that they need to get to. If there's a problem on the ships on the ocean, it will affect the port. If there's a problem at the port, it will affect the trucks and rails. If there's a problem with the trucks and rails, it'll affect the warehousing and distribution and the ability to get that product to the consumers. So it was really important not to isolate any particular mode, but to consider it as a system. And the question we all asked is, what do we want this system to do? What do we want to be when we grow up is what I used to say to my staff. Who do we want to be when all's said and done, all the projects are done, the strategy is finished and everything is implemented? What do we want to be? Do we want to be the #1 exporter of agricultural products? Maybe that is something that Canada wants to be. But to do that, what does it mean? And what impacts will it have on all the other modes, commodities, industrial products that use the system, if that's our goal? So really, these are questions that you can ask yourself, of your company, of your department, and of the major supply chain logistics and transportation network that we have here in Canada. What is our goal and how do we get there? So one of the things we discovered on the task force was we didn't really know the answer to that question. Everybody has their own goal. Department of Finance has their own goal. Department of Agriculture has their goal. Department of Innovation will have their own goal. what do we want to be when we grow up? What do we want Canada to be? And really, we needed somebody or a group of somebodies to own that. So one of the very first recommendations we came up with was creating a national supply chain office, a national office that could cross all of those different departments and collaborate across all of those different departments and engage the private sector as needed to enable what that goal was going to be. And I'm sure many of you know, or hopefully have all heard, that the Transport Canada has created that national supply chain office and has staffed that office. It's still very new. They're getting their feet under them. There's lots of work on the go, but it is created. So everyone recognized, yes, that was a gap. That was something that we needed to resolve. So that's a great learning coming out of the task force work. The other piece of the puzzle is the government was doing a great job trying to fund what they thought were the projects that were needed to enable our national supply chain. The problem is there was no one group who was accountable for making sure that all of those projects went into place, that the result of those projects was provided in the way that it was intended, and that it was enabling the supply chain going forward. There were certain pieces spread across all kinds of different areas, but there really was no champion within the government at a federal level. And what I'm speaking about is the National Trade Corridor Fund. It is a massive fund of a lot of money that enables projects for infrastructure within Canada. But there was no connectivity between all of those projects, and there was no real connection to an overall strategy. It was, we think in this area there is this need, a proposal was put forward, it was approved, but again, those connections weren't really there. So when you think about a systems approach, if you were to put a logistics park at Halifax Stanfield Airport in order to enable more freight to be imported and exported easily, what does that mean? Does that have an effect on the airport's activities? Is there going to be more truck activity in and out of that particular area? Are the roads infrastructure set up to handle that? Is the rail infrastructure, if it's massive quantities, set up to handle that? So one project will have an impact on others. So we put a lot of accountability in the National Supply Chain Office coming out of the task force, but really it was to find that one person who could be that champion, that one group that could really be that overarching view of, are we truly being connected? Are we truly understanding what all of these projects will do and all of these funded projects and activities will do? And is it really enabling what we want to enable? Again, the task force was not assessing these projects. It was not evaluating any of them. It was more, how do we make them happen better, faster, easier, and enable them across different departments? Again, it was really about connecting what the private sector wants and can contribute to what the public sector can do and the government can do. So the National Supply Chain Task Force, again, is still in its not quite infancy, I'd say toddler stage. They're doing great work. They've got a great staff that also was part of the work and the secretariat that was supporting the task force. So they've got some history there too, which is great. But they're just getting their feet under them. And if you'll see, one of the things that they're doing that I think is really important is listening again. They are, and the office is reaching out to other governments and seeing what are the best practices out there that maybe we can adopt in Canada, which will affect the North American market, without reinventing the wheel. What are the great ideas that others have already had that we can leverage? The task force, we had some experience with some of the things that are going on in Australia. And we thought, you know what, that's a very comparable geographic setup to Canada. It's vast distances between highly populated areas that freight needs to travel on. So why couldn't we look at another country and see if perhaps they're doing it better and we can adopt something that they have already gotten. So you may or may not have seen late last week, early this week, an announcement that the G7 has agreed to a group of collaborators to collaborate on transportation and logistics systems and see if there's a way that as a group we can find a better solution. So I think that's really the biggest theme that we wanted to deliver out of the task force. You'll see the publication is very long. There's lots of other things in there, but really what we found is we needed a strategy. We needed to know what our goal was. What were we trying to be when we grew up? And how do we collaborate with all the different parties that influence that system in order to achieve the goal? And like I said, the great news is that we're well on our way there. The other thing I mentioned was listening. We had to listen to a lot of stakeholders. Kathy, I swear we listened to all of the feedback we got. And I would say, again, some of it was adversarial, some of it was collaborative, some of it was just for our information. But taking all of that time to listen is really important because we all come at these from different perspectives. We all come at these issues from different perspectives. And at the end of the day, it takes all of us working together to make it happen. And so again, continuing that theme of listening and collaborating with people. Maybe we're not the experts. Maybe we haven't gotten this figured out yet. Maybe it's okay not to have all the answers. And so these are the things that you know, the task force did and the lessons learned. And again, these are things that we can take into our own jobs and our own daily lives as we're questioning why we're doing things the way we're doing them. The other thing is being okay with failing. We are by nature not good with that. We don't like to get things wrong. We don't like to make mistakes. And no one wants to make a decision that causes problems. But sometimes we have to take that leap of faith and try something new. And one of the things that we saw the government, rather than pushing from a policy and regulation perspective, is maybe the government can be the facilitator between all of these groups. Maybe we can take some of that adversarial nature out of the relationship and use the government as the facilitator of the conversation. And let's try something. Maybe it won't work the first time. Maybe we have to tweak it a little bit. Maybe we have to turn around and go 180 degrees in the other direction. But we have to be willing to try. And that trust is something that needs to be built. And the government at the time, and continues to today, could be that facilitator to create that trust. One of the things that when I talk about listening and sharing and collaborating, I think we overuse this word now, is digitization of our supply chains. And this is a personal opinion that we overuse that term because I don't know anyone in the supply chain industry that doesn't already digitize their supply chain. It may not be perfect. It may not be Amazon-like on time. I may not be watching my Uber delivery of freight coming to me in instantaneous wrong turns. But digitization of the supply chain has been going on for decades. This is not new news. What is new is the want to share that information and the ability to share that information on a common platform with common terms so that we're all speaking the same language. And that is the challenge, not the digitization part. The technology has come so far. We have so much data, we don't know what to do with ourselves. But data is just that, it's data. What it needs to be is information that we can make decisions, actionable decisions from. And so instead of digitizing our supply chain, it is really enabling information flow within our supply chain. And it happens to be digital and it happens to be data flow. But at the end of the day, data is just that. You need it to be information that you can make an actionable decision from. And I think The government has got that focus now. I think they realize that everyone has digitized their own spot in the supply chain, so to speak, their own node in the supply chain. And now it's how do we connect the dots technologically? How do we do that in a way that allows us to make decisions? So as an example, ports get visibility to what ships are coming toward them weeks in advance because they leave their origin ports weeks in advance and they're loaded. You don't reload them in the middle of the ocean. You know exactly what's on them and exactly what's coming. So can't we use some of that information for forecasting, capacity, production needs, resources? And those resources could be human, they could be equipment, they could be any number of things. And then maybe we can share some of that information to the next node in the supply chain. So we've used the vessel information to plan at the port. Well, once the port has a plan, why not share it with the trucking industry and the rail industry? So they know if there is a blip in demand or supply that perhaps they can react to it. And again, I'm using a very specific example because we have felt more pressure when we have a node like a port have issues. But it's an example of we know the data is out there. We know we could use it. How can we best use it to create information and create an action out of that? So there's a lot of work going on with that perspective. We all don't speak the same language. We use one acronym for 10 different things. And how do we make that one language? And so one of the recommendations, again, out of the task force is, how can the government be a facilitator for those conversations? Rather than enforcing through policy and regulation, how do we create a conversation? Because it's in everyone's best interest to be able to do that.
Shauna, I have a question for you.
Sure.
It's for Barb, and she says, and you kind of answered a little bit of it, but it's a two-part question.
Okay.
She says, you spoke to the data and the sharing of data for better forecasting and planning. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on the smart container tech being adopted or deployed by Hapag-Lloyd? And how do you feel this might revolutionize the industry?
I think personally, we have been trying to do container level identification for a long time. And we have struggled when that technology has to cross platforms. So Hapag-Lloyd has created the smart container, but that can't talk to a chassis yet. And it can't talk to a train yet. So I think it is a great first step, but I think we still need that collaboration and that communication with the other nodes to make it the most useful. One example, way back in the time tunnel, RFID was the buzzword of the day. And we were going to put UPC codes and barcodes on everything. And that was going to be our way of connecting all of the dots. It was not scalable. And that was one of the biggest challenges. So I see great things with the Hapag-Lloyd Smart Container, but I think it's an initial step, and that collaboration communication with the other nodes is going to be critically important. I hope that answers your question, Barb. The data I talked about for forecasting, absolutely, but it's also good as a postmortem. So forecasting is very proactive. Sometimes it's good to look back and say, how did we do? So we saw this coming. We planned as best we could. We reacted as best we could. But how did we do after the fact? And what could we have done differently? So as an industrial engineer by trade, closed loops are very important to me. And it's very important to also do those follow-ups after the fact. So let's say we had a forecast, we did the best we could, Did we succeed in what our goal was? Did we have the right capacity set up? Were we fluid in our ability to move freight or move goods? And one of the things that I don't think everybody realized, I think even on the task force, is one node handles so when you think about a port,
So
we usually think
sorry,
about.
I think we just lost you for 1 second there. Could you just do a little bit of a repeat?
Still there?
Yes, we got you back, but we lost you for a second.
Okay, sorry. So what I was saying was each node in the supply chain handles all commodities and all products. I used a port as an example, and I've been to many ports all over the world, and the first thing you see is boxes. Colorful boxes stacked to the skies. And so we think of only intermodal and those containers and boxes when we think of a port. But agricultural products also go through there, and they are not necessarily in a box. Sometimes they're bulk. We have metals, minerals, chemicals, frac sand for those chemicals to bring them out of the ground. We have forest products. As much as we don't probably produce as much paper as we used to, there is still paper out there, and the products that feed into those paper products. And all of those, you share the same network, share the same resources, share the same roadways and railways and ports. So going back to one of my initial comments about the supply chain network here in Canada is, if we all share the same network, we all have to come together to make it all work. And that collaboration is important. So I see value in the Hapag-Lloyd Smart Container, but we also need all the other pieces to connect to make it work. And so that's why I say I think it's a good first step. Back to, we need to try things, have them succeed, have them fail, tweak them, and move on. I think that's a good first step. And Hapag isn't the only one who's working on those kinds of technologies, but they are the first ones to really productionize it. So it's encouraging, to say the least. The last thing that I think, or was some of the last things that I wanted to talk about coming out of the task force is, before the pandemic, I think all of our supply chains, logistics, transportation systems, optimization was the key. I think that was the only thing we ever talked about, was efficiency and making sure everything was effectively working, and we were optimizing, lean manufacturing, lean concepts, Six Sigma, take the waste out, not have any safety stock or buffer stock in a system, and have that system tuned. And one of my old colleagues at Canadian Tire coined a phrase, I don't even know if it's a real word, but we over-optimized everything. We got to a point where we knew exactly when trucks were going to show up at a distribution center. We knew exactly when those trains were going to leave. We knew exactly what was going to be on them, and we could time them within hours and minutes instead of days. The pandemic exposed was, systems don't work as you expect them to. You need a backup plan. You need to be creative. You need to have alternatives. You may not use them all the time, but you can't, it's like an ostrich. I use a lot of analogies, but you can't put your head in the sand and hope the system is just going to fix itself and keep working the way you always expected it to work. And so as the task force started discussing some of these things, it was, how can we work with potentially CBSA and the border crossings to enable alternatives? We have a lot of ports on the Great Lakes in central Canada that connect the US and Canada, our biggest trading partner, our biggest trading border, and yet we can't clear some of that product coming into the country at those ports. That would have been an amazing alternative to have during the pandemic, when our coastal ports were struggling with resources, human and otherwise, and massive amounts of freight coming in. It would have been nice to be able to have an alternative. So part of the conversation that need to happen now is all that creativity that we came up with we don't want to lose sight of all of that because it could really be something that we could use on an ongoing basis. A lot of those ports on the Great Lakes are also bipartisan owned. They actually are owned by two different countries, and they're operated by those port authorities and in conjunction with each other. Is there a way perhaps that we can take some of those learnings from a really difficult time and say, instead of forgetting them and putting our blinders on, how do we reuse that information to move forward? How do we learn from those mistakes?
We have a question for you, Shauna. Marta, are you going to ask it on your own? Okay, great.
Yeah, sorry, I got caught in an event this morning, and I'm listening in the car as I drive. So I just thanks for letting me ask the question directly. I just so enjoy listening to what you're saying at this moment, because like a lot of the folks on the call, I've been in this game a pretty long time, and my focus from the Cross Border Institute is land border crossings. So, you know, way back in 9/11, when 9/11 happened, we had a huge amount of focus on dialogue and sharing of information at the very highest levels of both the American and Canadian federal government. And I totally agree with you. The dialogue needs to continue. We learned a lot during the restrictions here at Windsor, Detroit, at the land border crossing. During 9/11, tremendous effort and dialogue to create new programs, the Trusted Trader programs, moving forward with Trusted Traveler. And then COVID there seemed to have been a bit of an amnesia around how we handled things back at 9/11. And then we saw border restrictions on the movement of business people versus the, you know, pretty good flow of commodities that was happening at the time. Do you have a sense, having served on the task force, that the conversations will broaden again at the federal level, and there's hope that we have a continuous dialogue?
I do, Marta, and thank you very much for your question and your comments. Very much appreciated that we're still headed in the right direction. Absolutely, I do believe those conversations will continue to happen, especially between Canada and the U.S. So as Canada struck their national supply chain office, so did the U.S. So the recognition of needing that conversation to happen at the highest levels of the federal government with those two largest trading partners with that massive land border, absolutely. I do believe those conversations will continue. And they will continue because the supply chain network needs it. And they've recognized it. I think, like I said, the pandemic exposed a lot of our weaknesses that were already there. That nothing that happened during the pandemic wasn't something that wasn't already existing in our infrastructure, but it did open our eyes to needing those alternative plans. I call them plans B, C, D, E. You need those backup plans. So I do believe at the federal level, those conversations are continuing to happen. So thank you very much for that. And again, for those who didn't know, like I said, very, very strong support from the American side as well. As we struck our task force in Canada, they struck a task force in the US. Our co-chairs were very much involved in conversations south of our border. And those conversations are continuing with both national offices in place.
And we have more of a comment, I believe, from Marion, who's struggling with her technology today. So she's put it here in the chat, and she says that she had hoped that the SCO would recruit key private sector specialists, and she said she's disappointed that this hasn't happened. I believe they did get a couple, if not mistaken. And that she realizes that they have some consultants, but they're not making use of the expertise, which is primarily in the private sector at a full-time capacity. And did you want to add to that, Marian? Because I see your hands up now, so maybe all's good.
Oh, I can hear her.
Okay, great.
Basically, it says what I'm concerned about. I was really hoping to see some major use made of the expertise that's out there in the railways, the trucking industry, shipping, and so on. I know they've got a couple of consultants, but that to me doesn't cut it at all. I don't think there's the depth of expertise in the government on supply chain. There just isn't. And I'm really concerned about that because I don't want it to become just another bureaucratic thing.
Absolutely, Marion. I think coming out of the task force, that was something that we focused on. Was we were on the task force, we were the supply chain experts, and of course on the secretariat and within the government, they're government experts. And they're policy experts and they're political experts that know how to maneuver within government. But understanding the specifics of supply chain, logistics, and transportation, certainly they were leaning on other outside resources, including ourselves. I think what they're still trying to do is figure out what the right mix is, and I would agree they're lighter on the subject matter experts right now. I still would believe that they know what they don't know. And I know this sounds very silly, but you have to be self-aware enough to know what you aren't an expert at, and reach out to those experts to garner that knowledge. So I think they're still trying to create at this point the structure to enable the conversations between, as I said, they've enabled now a G7 group of individuals. Again, all of these folks are great political experts, but not necessarily supply chain and logistics experts. But my hope is because of bringing those individuals together, that they will reach into the coffers of all the experts we have in the industry, both in Canada and the US. Yes. So they're not there yet. Marianne, I would agree. They've got a couple of really solid folks that are working with them. Some CILTNA alumni are out there, yes. But we definitely, I think, when they get into the specifics of some of the conversations that need to happen, then yes, I do believe they're light on that subject matter expert still. But we have some road left to go. And I think once they get the structure and their mandate going forward, we'll be in better shape. One thing to recognize about government offices, of course, they're funded by federal budgets. And so part of all of this is making sure that it's continuing to be funded going forward, regardless of what political party is in place and in power, minority, majority, and otherwise, because it is important. It is something that is not party driven. This is something that is enabling Canada within the global market. And one thing to recognize about Canada is we are small in the global market. So we need to do things better than everybody else to convince the world that we're still someone to be part of that global network, because there are alternatives. As much as we consume a lot, and meaning we import a lot and we also export a lot, Canadian infrastructure doesn't have to be used to get it to us. It can come through other gateways. It can come through other methods. And so we want to make sure that our reputation within that global network continues to grow. And so I am encouraged. I am a little disappointed it's taken as long as it has, but I've also been told that this is actually moving quite quickly for government. So we'll take it for what it is. But thank you, Marion, for that. I do agree. They need the subject matter expertise from the industry to really balance the political expertise and government expertise that they currently have. Absolutely. Specifically on modes of transport like trucking. It is intricate. I mean, as much as we all drive on the roads and we see trucks passing us, that doesn't necessarily make us an expert in that industry. Just because we sit at a railroad crossing as we watch a train go by and wonder why it can't be, faster, shorter, all of the things to get us where we need to go, we're not necessarily all experts in that. And so there are some specifics, marine as well. I don't want to forget the marine industry, and I also don't want to forget air. We leveraged air cargo transit during the pandemic to a level never seen before. Instead of high value, small products put on bellies of planes, literally anything was traveling by air. And it was really all about getting product to the consumer when it needed to get there. We managed, we did it. Why can't we continue to do it? Why did that volume drop off all of a sudden? So there are a lot of modes that need to reconnect and go back to those creative ideas we came up with. And if they worked and enabled us, why can't we continue to do them? So thank you for that, Marianne. Okay. Last one, I promise, and then I'll stop talking and we can we can wrap up. I warned everybody that there's Irish in my background, so I have the gift of gab and I can fill this hour like nobody's business. But the last one is to be mindful of, there is no one size fits all. So as much as the government is the one who started the National Supply Chain Task Force, and the government published recommendations, short-term, medium-term, long-term, and the federal government has enabled the National Supply Chain Office with staff from the Secretariat that was supporting us and others, really policy and regulation may not be the answer to every question. And so it's important to strike that balance between the government being a facilitator, an enabler, and a regulator. And understanding that it's a combination of all of those that is going to make us successful going forward, not just one or the other. And one of the things that's really important is competition. Competition breeds ideas, it breeds service alternatives, it breeds a lot of great things. And I truly believe in that. And again, this is coming from one of the executive at one railroad, and there was another one on the other side of the fence. So as much as, we were competitors, it did foster a lot of collaboration on great ideas. Because at the end of the day, no one wants a new railroad going through their backyards. Nobody's going to give up any more property for any more track. So sharing, coordinating, and leveraging each other in areas that make sense, and then competing hard in the others, is a good thing. And I use rail because that's near and dear to my heart. But as a customer, I used every mode of transport, trust me. In Asia, they don't necessarily have rail moving a lot of freight. So you have some creative ideas on how they move freight in Asia. But it is important to have that competition, and healthy competition. Sometimes regulation and policy flies in the face of that competition and flies in the face of that creativity and those ideas and that potential investment from the private sector. Sometimes it really is investment that solves the problem, and sometimes it's a joint investment that needs to happen. So one of the cautions that I think I would continue to give the National Supply Chain Office and all federal departments is regulation should not always be the first solution, but it may be part of the solution. Anyone who read that publication that the task force put out there was a section in there on long haul interswitching, which is a very specific rail term, and it has nothing to do with physically switching tracks or anything like that. But it is an enabler of competition, or it could be a detriment to competition, depending on how it's implemented. And one of the things the task force said is, we heard that this may be something that we need to look into, and we need the experts to look into it. And we asked that they do that research and they spend that time to understand what impacts a policy regulation change may have. I think the jury is still out on whether those decisions were right, wrong, or indifferent. I am no longer with the railroad, so I will not share what their opinions are on that. But it's important to continue to evaluate the success or failure of decision making on those regulations, because again, at the end of the day, competition breeds good things. And this is coming from one who competed a lot. So I do think that there are ideas and collaborations and facilitations that can happen without necessarily regulation policy having to step in and correct that. So I will end my conversation on our lessons learned there and just say what we learned from that National Supply Chain Task Force is not something that is just applied to our national supply chain infrastructure. It can be applied everywhere. Let's listen to each other. Let's appreciate we have different perspectives and opinions and come at things from different angles. And let's try and facilitate the conversations to move all of us forward. Because if one of us succeeds, we all succeed. Thank you, Kathy.
No, thank you so much, Shauna. Christine has put some comments in, and she's just asked a question. So if we could have we have a minute here. So she asked, first of all, said thank you for your excellent perspective, but she was asking if you could just talk a little bit about what you've learned as striking a balance between your dynamic career and having a personal life, which we all know which one suffers. We all know, but maybe you could just give us a brief response to that.
Yes. Everyone likes to talk about work-life balance and what is the right balance. I would say there is never a time where it's one answer. It's not 50-50 all the time. Every day you choose how to spend your 24 hours. And some days you choose to spend it on the work stuff. And sometimes you spend it on the personal life stuff. And sometimes it's a mix of the two. I am incredibly passionate about what I do. So my life and my work tend to bleed into each other today, as an example. I am really passionate about furthering women in transportation and logistics, and this is important to me to be here. So I've balanced my personal life for an hour and a half to allow me to do that. There are going to be days where that balance teeters one way or the other. But what I would suggest my learning is, as long as you're being nurtured by the things that you're doing and that you are satisfied and getting satisfaction out of what you're doing, that balance teeters every day. And I would suggest that if you think it's ever going to be 50-50, I will tell you it won't be. And that it's okay not to be 50-50. And that the days that you lean a little bit more on your work side and you have to make maybe some sacrifices and decisions on your personal side, those make sure that you do the reverse, to make sure you fill your cup to be able to go back and do that work again. But yes, everybody talks about everything has to be on balance and everything has to be, the seesaw can't and the scales can't tip, but they will never be even. That's not a reasonable expectation. But I do think that making sure that you're getting satisfaction out of what you're doing is really important, because it can be draining. The hours can be long. I can tell you when there were blockades on the rails, Kathy was there for those. They were not fun. And so the balance tipped very much on the work side, because it was very important to make sure that heating oil and propane was getting through so people didn't freeze at night. Those are decisions you make. But when that was over, we all took a breath. We all took the time to reset and recharge and go back. So like I said, that one was probably 100-0 rather than 50-50 or 70-30. But again, you reset and you recharge and you come back again. So that's what I would say about that balance.
Thank you very much, Shauna.
No problem.
Thank you for taking the time, especially with what you're going through right now. But I
Thank
just
you,
want to say
Kathy.
to everybody, you know, you were far too modest. You didn't take any kudos for how fast the supply chain task force was able to not only handle all of the interviews, sweeping across the country like mad people and taking the time to listen, and then get the report out and demanding that it be public. And for that,
Yes.
there's no greater words to hear than we're so grateful for that, because you know, hopefully they're going to take all the lessons learned in there and put it to good use, because you guys certainly gave everything that you possibly had to get that done. So from all of us in the supply chains right across the country, and those around the world should be grateful for what you guys accomplished. And for that, thank you, a deep, deep thank you. And thank you for taking the time today. It was wonderful. We're going to go a few minutes over, but I hope you all will agree with me. It was well worth it. And you know, Shauna, you just mentioned about taking a breath after the blockades, and we only had time for a very short breath because about 2 weeks later, this terrible thing called COVID happened, and it just went right into that. I think we've had the worst 4 years possibly that we ever could have imagined was going to happen, and we're still, our heads are spinning. There was protests yesterday, and then we have the
Yes.
lure of strikes coming to
We had boats stuck in canals. We
yeah.
had wars start we didn't expect. There will always be something, but you're right. It's been a little bit much the last few years.
We just want to tell them all to stop it so we could just catch our breath. That would be fabulous.
It would
I
be, wouldn't it?
Oh my gosh, for sure. You're welcome to join us. We totally understand if you have to run. We've got about 5 minutes more. Rebecca's going to do a little chat for us, and we wish you all the best in what you're going through right now, Shauna. And thank you again for the time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. I am going to skip out. Thank you very much.
Bye now, and thank you.
Thank you, Shauna.
All right, Rebecca, let's see. I'll get you up your slide, I hope, here. There we go. Whoops, I think I missed one. There we go. Thanks, Rebecca.
Yeah, we'd just like to, hold on, let me, my camera is on. We'd just like to basically extend a thank you to Shauna as well. But we'd like to ask people that if you'd like to join WiLAT as join our group, we would love to have you join us. We're looking for about 3 to 4 people to help with our communications, our newsletter, introduce members to each other, and also, you know, join our monthly meetings and just talk about what it is that you'd like to see us do, what kind of events you'd like, topics, anything like that. So if you'd like to, you can just reach out to me, Rebecca at admin@CILTNA.com. You can also go to the website and see it there. But we'd love to have you join us and your input, anything like that. We'd love to have the help. And that, what's the next slide, Kathy? I think is, oh yes. And we have the dates for the calendar, that's right. Would you like me to do them?
Sure, go right ahead.
So yeah, so join us on June 12th. We're going to have Julia Tessetto Williams, who's a supply chain coordinator with Hamilton Health Services. She's going to be speaking to us, and I know there's a topic because that's the next one. She's going to be talking about her growth in healthcare and the questions she didn't know she had. So we're looking forward to that. That'll be at 12 p.m. on June 12th, which is a Wednesday this time. So in August, we have nothing. We have a summer break. September 29th, we're hoping for an anniversary celebration. Hopefully, well, we'll give you the details on that once they've been determined. But it should be exciting. And on November 19th, we'll also we'll be having a presentation, but we have yet to determine who that will be just yet. If you have ideas, please let me know though. Or if you know you have a topic you'd like to speak on or you'd like to present, do let me know, reach out. And that sounds good. And the next slide is, I believe, oh yeah, here's about Julia, what she's going to be speaking to us about. So like I said, that's a Wednesday. Usually we have Tuesdays, but we're changing it to a Wednesday in June. And hopefully you can join us. And then, yeah, so we'd love to have you join us if you're not already a member of CILTNA. We have something for everybody, from students to those building their careers, to those who have already accomplished much in the profession. Wherever you are in your career ladder, we have a category for you. There are many different levels of membership that you can join. Members of the Institute, like, we offer opportunities to build your network, professional designations, we have SILT post-nominal letters that represent a level of membership that demonstrate high level of expertise in your profession, and they are recognized internationally in all SILT territories. We also offer career development through free webinars, conferences, and meetings. We also have a weekly newsletter where we share information. We have job postings as well on there, and a digest of important news covering regional and North American events in logistics and transport. Also exclusive to members, you get access to the CILT Knowledge Center, in which members have unlimited access to CILT International's vast collection of logistics and transport resources. There's 7,000 global newspapers, magazines, and journals. So if you'd like to learn more, you can visit our website at www.ciltna.com, or you can email me, Rebecca Whalen, at admin@ciltna.com.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We know your time is very precious, and thank you for giving it to us. I'm sorry we went a few minutes over our time, but I think having Shauna speaking with us was well worth that extra time in your personal investment. And exactly, I think the theme that Shauna left us with is to make sure that you keep your cup full and make sure you make that cup has everything you need in your journey as the transportation or logistics person. And we wish you a great day and see you all in June. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good one.